Clearly one of the best investments I've ever been involved in.
Just get the damn vaccine.
Welcome. The Truth About Vaccines presents Remedy, and this is episode number 2. I'm Ty Bollinger. This is my lovely wife, Charlene. We're your hosts, and we're so thankful that you've tuned in.
We hope you've learned a lot from episode 1, and that you were able to absorb some of the many remedies available. But just in case you missed it, here's a brief recap.
Throughout history, the truth tellers of science were actually the ones who were mocked or called quacks or ostracized from society.
The people that were using natural medicine back in the medieval times were considered witches, and it was considered witchcraft.
People were living in extremely crowded dwellings. People took their wastewater and basically dumped them into ditches in the streets, and those eventually made their way into the drinking water at that time because there wasn't much water filtration or anything like that. By 1908, you're seeing this idea of water closets, which was an indoor bathroom with indoor plumbing. You're seeing the idea of chlorinated water. You have basically no more cholera outbreaks, which was a major killer at that time, typhoid, dysentery, all that stuff starts to go away just drastically.
So what we see for all of these diseases, such as measles, whooping cough, polio, scarlet fever, typhoid fever, tuberculosis, you see the reduction in disease mortality for all of them. But only some of them have vaccines.
Is there an antidote to smallpox? Yeah, Native Americans had one for years and years and years and years and years and years. I mean, since like the 1700s. So there is a plant called Sarracenia purpura. It's better known as the pitcher plant.
During the mid-1800s, when iodine was first created, iodine was a very powerful remedy for working with smallpox.
Homeoprophylaxis is a technique utilized by homeopaths to prevent disease from occurring. We call them nosodes, N-O-S-O-D-E-S, nosodes, and there are nosodes for any and every disease or disease process you can imagine.
The vaccine industry is the driver of the entire sickness care system. I can't call it a healthcare system, but the entire sick care system.
Why would all the governments around the world force you to take an experimental shot never proven safe or effective ever? Who benefits the most by forcing vaccines into you and convincing you they're safe and effective and lying to you the whole time? The pharmaceutical industry does.
The vaccine industry is a criminal cartel. Their products don't work as they claim. They're not as safe as they claim, and they harm and kill millions of people every year all around the world.
The most common cause of bankruptcy in the United States is medical problems. So that is insane. It's all designed by the cartel to extract as much money from the population as possible, and they do it primarily through the drug companies.
These are the companies that gave us the opioid crisis, which is killing 110,000 Americans every year, twice as many people who were killed in the entire 20-year Vietnam War. These are our children that are being killed by this industry.
We, of course, in the United States, have the most aggressive vaccine schedule. We also now have the highest infant mortality of any industrialized country.
CDC does recommend that infants or small children get vaccinated at 2, 4, and 6 months, and they're given a cocktail of vaccines. And here's the problem. The problem is that there has not, to my knowledge, been a study actually showing that giving all of these vaccines at the same time is safe.
I can provide no assurances that this hyper-vaccination orthodoxy is safe for children.
There's other things the parents should know about too, that your physician is getting paid bonuses, in many cases $400 per vaccine, to make sure your child gets that vaccine. And the parents ought to know that too.
I'm disturbed that multiple press stories are trying to grasp at straws, anything that they think they can associate with sudden death, to distract Americans away from the real cause of sudden death, which is COVID-19 vaccination.
I believe that both COVID-19 and the COVID-19 mRNA jabs are both bioweapons.
There's a Chinese herb that's been used for thousands of years to end pandemics. In Chinese medicine, it's called ba jiao. And it's known in English as star anise. And this herb contains a molecule called shikimic acid. Shikimic acid is used by the pharmaceutical company Roche to manufacture Tamiflu, which is known to stop pandemics because it contains shikimic acid.
Schizandra berry is what I would put in there. Now, in the lineage of Chinese medicine that I was taught in, Schizandra is considered the #1 herb in the world. Another really good anti-COVID and anti-jab substance is carrots. So carrot juice and then dandelion leaf, and those two together, good combination. Great if you're into juicing. Those two are really fun to do together.
Another example of an herb that can be very helpful here is licorice root, which contains a very potent molecule called glycyrrhizin.
There was a peer-reviewed study recently that affirmed that nanokinase has the ability to basically neutralize the spike protein, which is, of course, implicated in all of these various cardiovascular issues.
Imagine there was an elephant, and you wanted the elephant to go up the hill, and it didn't want to go. You're going to have a problem. You're going to have to get a problem. I don't care. You got 50 people trying to push an elephant up the hill who sat down. That's what we are. We are the 99%. We are that elephant, and they can't push us up the hill unless we walk.
It's not about black, white, pinstripe, polka dot, or plaid. It's not about left wing, right wing, or in between. It's about us being human beings, American citizens. And if we are American citizens, the land of the free, the home of the brave, we are not slaves. Don't allow these people to enslave us.
There is no place in medicine whatsoever for playing God, for forcing people to take a drug, undergo a procedure that they do not want to, that they do not voluntarily consent to.
The vaccine emperor is naked. The facade has been shattered. We are resilient. We are informed. And we're willing to tell the truth. And that's why they don't want you to hear any of this.
In this episode, we're going to cover the history of the polio vaccine, examine the established relationship it has to cancer, bust some pervasive vaccine myths, go even deeper on the COVID-19 injections, investigate some new studies, and of course, provide remedies and solutions to potentially devastating medical interventions, some of which are being forced down our throats.
Before we get rolling, in order to understand how much power we truly have as a people, it's important to realize that many of the decisions that affect your health and your future are being made by a relatively small group of people.
You have to understand that there's always been a group of people that are in control and managing and running the world from the beginning of time.
They're basically running every government at this point. You can see that easily if you look at any media. It's all the advertisements are big pharma. If you look at any government, you'll see that the biggest lobbyists in Washington, D.C. or Canada or any other place, they're all big pharma lobbyists. And so they're running it. They're running the world.
Big Pharma does appear to be influencing the entire world with their never-ending supply of vaccines and drugs, many of which have been approved by the FDA and pushed throughout the medical literature in peer-reviewed articles.
I saw a video a couple of weeks ago that really struck home. I think it looked like it was made back in the 60s. This older scientist saying that most scientific achievements and most scientific inquiry happens on the fringes. It's not in the main core of where science is or science lives. Because especially today, we're always concerned about peer-reviewed articles and evidence-based medicine. But what a peer-reviewed article means is that everybody agrees with it, and there's little innovation that happens there. So sometimes people have to come from the fringes to actually make good science and change the way things are going.
One physician and scientist who was considered to be fringe and who tried to change the way things were going in medicine was Ignaz Semmelweis, born in Budapest in 1818.
Ignaz Semmelweis. Okay, Ignaz Semmelweis, Dr. Semmelweis was the first doctor to tell other surgeons that, it would probably be a good idea to wash your hands, after you're out doing an autopsy on a dead body before you go into the operating room or before you go in and, deliver a baby. And what was happening back then is they would go from one room to the next and never wash their hands. They see 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, including dead people, with dirty hands. And it caused all kinds of infections. And he tried to convince everyone that they needed to wash their hands in between every patient. And they called him a lunatic. Said he was absolutely preposterous. This couldn't be true. You're an idiot. Okay? Turns out he was exactly right.
Semmelweis kept trying to convince doctors in Europe to wash their hands with chlorine, but no one would listen to him because he had tried to change one of the tenets of their religion. In 1865, when he was only 47 years old, Semmelweis was committed to a mental asylum where he died of sepsis.
Much in the same manner, doctors who challenged the current medical belief system and who spoke up about the danger of the COVID-19 injections or dared to treat COVID with an unimproved treatment like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine were demonized and persecuted.
So the doctors that actually spoke up in questioning anything about the vaccine or one vaccine, like an mRNA shot, were denigrated, were given a scarlet letter and called, anti-science, anti-vaccine, or anti-vaxxers. And then they were suddenly, from being at the top level of their field, like Dr. Peter McCullough in cardiology, very well published, well respected, well researched, suddenly they were denigrated, stripped of credentials, if you will, or in any way to diminish their ability to communicate what they had encountered and discovered and observed and reported on. And so in this way, much like censorship of a fundamentalist religion or cult, these doctors were curtailed from being able to communicate as doctors, even though they had all the qualifications moments before. The moment they left the belief system of the Church of Pharmaceutical Mysticism, the denomination of vaccinology, they were attacked and denigrated so that you would not pay attention to them. They didn't want that to be impactful of the greater consciousness of the people who had basically put themselves in a subjugated position beneath doctors, believing that they were unquestionable and they had some kind of godly connection to knowledge that you or I did not. And then we find out that that's a false idol or false authority, and that they were operating as authoritarians until they woke up, and then they were denigrated for not being authoritarian in this particular belief system.
The orthodoxy with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic is that SARS-CoV-2 was unassailable. It could not be treated. The orthodoxy said the only thing we could do is wait in lockdown, in fear, and be saved by a vaccine. And it applies today because a small group of doctors said no, they're not with the orthodoxy. This virus is treatable like all other infectious illnesses, and the vaccine needs to be safe and effective. So just like in the past, a few doctors broke from the orthodoxy. They were apostate, and they ultimately helped our advancement of science and understanding. They were right.
In today's climate, especially with COVID, you have pioneers that came forward for early treatment before the vaccine. They were trying to find solutions. They were on the ground. They were like generals in a war giving reports back saying, we have stuff on the ground here, trying to get to our government saying, we can help people, let us help people. And the decision was already made to wait for this vaccine. We have Didier Raoult, he was a French doctor, he is a French doctor. He was testing hydroxychloroquine. We have Vladimir Zelenko, same thing, another, really a true hero in the United States. Peter McCullough, another person advocating for this early treatment. These people are really the Galileos of our time, if you will, during this pandemic. One of the things that's interesting is because this age we're in is so fast, call it the information age because of the internet, whatever the case may be, the turnaround time to recognize these people for who they are is very short. So if this was 1800s or 1600s, it may have taken 100 years to recognize the contributions that Zelenko gave or the contributions that Didier Raoult gave. But now we're seeing them almost in near real time. So this is a silver lining of this information age we're in, because we're able to recognize truth instantaneously and have another lane created where we can have truth actually told against the dominant narrative, which in the case of early treatment was suppression, and it was wrong. And it killed lots of people.
I've received criticism from anonymous, uncredentialed fact checkers who make false counterclaims on social media. I have received multiple letters and been made aware of a process where the American Board of Internal Medicine has attempted to strip away my internal medicine and cardiovascular diseases certifications, essentially erasing my entire residency and fellowship, 6 years of my life. I have a perfect board examination performance rate. I have a perfect clinical practice metrics. I have clearly been singled out because of my U.S. Senate and multiple state Senate testimonies, and those statements were taken issue by the American Board, and I've responded thoroughly to their allegations. Currently, my case is on indefinite appeal. I've been fired from 2 jobs, with a perfect clinical and research track record, for no stated reason. No stated reason, no performance evaluation, no courtesy phone calls, no board votes, no fundamental explanation. I've been stripped of 2 professorships of medicine. Again, no phone call, no email, no faculty senate or due process. I've been stripped of all my National Institutes of Health committee positions for no reason. I've been removed from data safety monitoring boards and consulting contracts from Big Pharma for no stated reason, no courtesy phone call. I was the president of a major society, the Cardiorenal Society of America, the president, with no board meeting, no phone call, no communication. I was informed the society was dissolved. How does a medical society that has nothing to do with COVID-19 get dissolved with its current president in place? So what's happened to me is extraordinary.
It truly is extraordinary how doctors like Peter McCullough, who is one of the most published and renowned medical doctors in the entire world, were ostracized, belittled, called names, demonized, removed from boards, and many of them had their lives destroyed, all for questioning the current dogma about COVID and the COVID injections.
Now with COVID, we see any doctor or professional who speaks up against the quarantines, against masks, against the jab that's a untested new technology that was proven to be dangerous before they even rolled it out. You're just deplatformed, you're censored, your license is taken away. I've had to retire my license. I'm officially a retired pediatrician, no longer practicing medicine, after an endless hundreds of letters from the medical board over the past 4 years. So there's a huge effort ongoing to silence people.
And it's not just medical doctors who they've attempted to silence. A couple of years ago, the Center for Countering Digital Hate published their Disinformation Dozen list of the social media influencers who were spreading the most disinformation about vaccines. Yes, the Center for Countering Digital Hate published a digital hit list. Oh, the irony. Yes, we were on that list.
This Center for Countering Digital Hate just spun itself up, I think it was in 2019, with a big question mark around its funding. Like, how are these NGOs just suddenly appearing, claiming to combat misinformation and hate, and yet they themselves are, by definition, doing the very thing that they claim to be fighting, which is, very extreme ways of, targeting individuals who, for example, are just standing up and pointing out that there is research that shows there are unintended adverse effects of vaccines and that everyone should know about that and make a choice with that information. The way they've spun things is that advocacy is now being, characterized as killing people, literally.
of all the misinformation, 60% of the misinformation came from 12 individuals. 12 people are out there giving misinformation. Anyone listening to it is getting hurt by it. It's killing people.
Can we hold on 1 second? Can we look at the, for example, the FDA's PowerPoint they released before the vaccine, showing they were looking for 20-something signals of, serious side effects through post-marketing surveillance, including death. When we point these things out, that should be celebrated as, okay, wow, we're actually practicing medicine ethically, but instead we're being characterized as enemies of the state, literally.
FDA gets 50% of its budget from the pharmaceutical industry in exchange for fast-tracking vaccines or other drugs. The industry can pay the agency to fast-track them and to fast-track drugs and vaccines. And this is something that's critical for the industry, because once they file the patent, they have typically only 17 years till the patent expires, and they want to get that drug on the shelf for as many of those years as possible. And so there's a big incentive for them to fast track. And the way that Congress in its wisdom devised for that to happen, because it's very expensive for the agency, Congress said, well, if the industry wants to fast track a drug, it should pay for the added cost to the regulatory agency. That has turned out to be a huge budget stream for those agencies, and it's created a situation of agency capture on steroids, because you actually have individuals in the agencies whose salaries are dependent on that flow of cash. We should not have regulators collecting money. We're paying them salaries, and they either should be working for the government or the industry. They should not be trying to work for both, because you can't serve two masters.
The FDA needs to go away. The FDA needs to go away. It's quicker than any other organization. It's FDA approved, it's FDA cleared. Yeah, because the FDA is poisoning us, and they're covering their own behinds for their own transgressions, and they're all liable. They're all liable, and they're all accountable. Post-licensing, so when they throw those ads on TV, so those TV commercials are criminal fraud, and you're paying for them. So we have to take down the whole system and stop paying for the criminal fraud, because they actually published a paper after the fact and said, oh yeah, the Xarelto is causing this. Remember, the third leading cause of death in 2019, when they killed my mom, was iatrogenic medicine, medical mistakes, either untested, So when you watch that TV and it says, ask your doctor if Eliquis is right for you, you've given up your informed consent. Don't do it. Don't go anywhere near your doctor. No more. Bye-bye. No thank you. Everybody will be fine. Come to practitioners who will take care of you, or just simply feed your immune system with healthy things, and you'll be fine.
This is why it's important for everyone to get involved, because by your lack of attention, at this point, you're letting some very heinous criminal acts get away. We're talking about the full exposure of what's being called the censorship industrial complex. We've known this was working in the background. We saw little pieces of it, but through shadow banning that they denied, early in 2016, all the way up to this full censorship industrial complex with almost every agency in the United States flooding Twitter to tell them to censor accounts, literally sending them spreadsheets every week. And we're finding out now that they're censoring information that is true on vaccination harms, just to keep the sacrosanct idea of vaccine hesitancy or vaccine compliance. They want to try to maximize that. So anything that comes in the way of that, even if it's a true story, which we've known, I've been reporting about that since at least 2016, of families, parents of children with autism, these true stories that the media has went out of their way to attack and neutralize. Twitter and Facebook and all the other agencies, that's a big secret here, all the other agencies are doing this, the Facebook media companies and YouTube, Google, they all have the same kind of attack profile. So this is the big secret here, and this is again why independent voices are needed.
Independent voices are most definitely needed. That's why we produced this docuseries. That's why we created Remedy, because you deserve the truth and you deserve answers and solutions. So, do you have friends and family that need this information too? We're sure that you do.
Please join forces with us to help defeat the censorship industrial complex by sharing this docuseries with everyone you know. We really appreciate your help in getting this life-saving information out to everyone who needs it. There are proven remedies to the damage that's been done by the COVID-19 injections, specifically the spike protein.
There's no doubt about it. The spike protein is the most pathogenic, most disease-promoting and dangerous protein mankind has ever seen. It is far worse than staphylococcal toxins, tetanus toxins, other forms of animal venoms. The reason why the spike protein is so dangerous is because it's insidious and it's being produced within our own cells. It is presented on the surface of cells, creates autoimmune attack, and then it breaks free and it circulates. And when the spike protein circulates, it's going throughout the body and damaging organs, tissues, making people sick.
There's very basic biomechanical interventions that we know have been studied and in some way proven now, like for example, the study on nattokinase helping to degrade spike protein. Before that study came out, I was intuitively already thinking, well, here's a safe food-derived enzyme that's going to break down fibrin and other factors that can lead to a lot of the side effects we've been seeing with COVID jabs.
The only substance that's been described to dissolve the spike protein is a Japanese discovery called nattokinase. And nattokinase is a fibrinolytic enzyme, a proteolytic enzyme produced by Bacillus subtilis natto. And this a genus and species of this bacillus breaks down soy, and the enzyme can be collected, and it can be given as a supplement. And it clearly works. A paper by Tanakawa and colleagues shown in cell lysates that it basically completely dissolved the spike protein, and even in intact cell cultures that it can dissolve the spike protein and prevent infection from SARS-CoV-2. So nattokinase, current dosing is 2,000 fibrinolytic units, which is the equivalent of 100 milligrams twice a day. I think is a wonderful approach as the best we can. We don't have clinical data. I can't make therapeutic claims in patients with post-COVID syndromes or vaccine injury syndromes, but it's the best we have right now to try to reduce the burden of spike protein in the human body and give people half a chance at getting out of this mess of taking a COVID-19 vaccine and or COVID-19 illness.
Our blood clotting system is balanced, delicately balanced like all other systems in the body. And so we have something called fibrinogen, which turns into fibrin, which turns into clots. And then we have plasminogen, which turns into plasmin, which breaks down clots. And it's got to be, because you cut yourself, you've got to clot, but then you got to stop clotting. Otherwise you wind up in trouble. All right. So that it's a delicate dance all day long. Well, when you go to the doctor and they give you heparin or they give you Lovenox, these other injections, because you had a blood clot, those are stopping it from being produced, but they're not breaking it down. Natto stimulates plasminogen. So it breaks it down naturally. In other words, it stimulates the body to do it naturally. I use it with cancer all the time because just having cancer makes you more likely to have a blood clot, okay? And of all the natural, there's another one called lumbrokinase, which comes from earthworms. This is, of all of them, nattokinase is the strongest. And they've done actually clinical trials. It's not harmful. You can't harm yourself. It dissolves spike protein. So there's nothing else that does that. So when we talk about zinc, we talk about vitamin C, we talk about quercetin, all these things are dealing with the effects of the spike protein. Nothing else dissolves it. Now this is published. It's in the journal Molecules, September of 22, Degradative Effects of Nattokinase on Spike Protein of SARS-2 out of Josai University, Saitama. That's very, very, very important to know.
Nattokinase, write that down. I take it every day. Actually, I've been taking it every day for about the last decade. We're going to cover more COVID injection remedies later in the episode, but now we're going to focus on the polio vaccine, which was one of only a few vaccines that we both received when we were children back in the late 60s, early 70s. I think the others that I received were the MMR and the DPT.
So I went to medical school in 1976, and at that time we had the diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine available. With the whole cell pertussis vaccine, we had the polio vaccine available. I think either the injectable or the oral polio vaccine were available. MMR we didn't have. That had not been introduced. We had single measles vaccine, and at that time I think the mumps and rubella vaccines were not recommended or not available in the UK, not licensed. So MMR came later. So we're talking about 4 or 5 vaccines max.
The polio story is very interesting. My mom grew up in that era of, watching the iron lung images on the black boob tube, the little TVs, and the horrific messaging they were able to get across to scare the population to line up for the polio. Actually, it was the oral polio back then. And it was very effective. Strangely enough, with all the different channels we have and social media, they managed to grab hold of all of that too, and scare the whole world into doing this COVID nonsense. But we've looked, and you read Suzanne Humphrey's book, Dissolving Illusions. There's a new book out called Turtles All the Way Down. They have a massive chapter on the polio story. And there's another whole side to that story. There was a correlation between how much DDT was sprayed and how much polio there was. So those two things went in step.
Invented in the late 19th century as a nerve gas chemical weapon, in 1938, DDT was repackaged for the use as a mosquito killer. It was applied liberally from 1943 through 52 on swimming pools and school cafeterias full of children.
Advertisements for DDT ran in magazines and on the radio with the ironic and iconic slogan, "DDT is good for me." Apparently it wasn't actually good for you, since it was banned by the US government in 1972, and it has been declared a human carcinogen and linked specifically to non-Hodgkin lymphoma, testicular cancer, and liver cancer.
One of the things I learned over the course of my let's say adventures in natural medicine, having to overcome 24 years of chronic disease in my own life, was realizing that the stories we were told about the 20th century and that vaccines had eradicated a number of diseases or saved us from dying in mass wasn't actually accurate. And if we go back to the issue of polio, we come to question the very isolation of one virus that supposedly caused all of the paralysis in everybody that encountered it. And we find out that those that encountered what they called polio, interestingly enough, 99.9% of them never had paralysis, barely had any symptoms at all, maybe a mild sniffle, for instance. And so we realized that the time of paralysis was a time of heavy use of the chemical known as DDT.
Everyone has seen the videos of these trucks going through neighborhoods spraying kids in the community pools, spraying kids eating lunch at school. I mean, they literally sprayed this right on them. And this was a cause of, neurological issues down the road, cancers down the road. And by 1972, they had to withdraw it from the market. So this was something that, at the time they were spraying it, they had never done any long-term testing on that and what it did to kids, and they were spraying it directly on kids in neighborhoods and kids playing, things like that. So you have this idea that kids that had any symptoms from DDT spraying on them, they were immediately stamped as having polio symptoms, and that was gone into the official record keeping of polio. So you have this muddying of the water, but that was another aspect of what was going on at that time.
During polio was when we were really pushing DDT. So if you look at, and these were all when all the commercials were coming out where the kids were playing in DDT, and even in the military they were using DDT to decontaminate all the soldiers all the time and spraying it up into their uniforms. And the symptoms of DDT poisoning were identical to the symptoms of polio.
This DDT was known to create neurological damage and paralysis, and yet was covered up by blaming a virus. So the recognition of polio or paralysis blamed on a virus could actually be a toxicological burden caused by a chemical agent produced by a company that actually owned or controlled regulatory agencies so that you could be distracted from the real cause of paralysis. Now, in addition to DDT at the time of the 20th century when this paralysis was happening that they blamed on polio, there were also a lot of dietary shifts happening post-World War II, more chemical production of food as the munitions that were used for bomb-making material were now used to fertilize the soil artificially and synthetically, causing a further imbalance in the soil, resulting in the perceived need for more toxic components like pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides to kill the things that were killing the plants that were growing in imbalanced and deficient soil or toxicologically burdened soil. And so all of this led to, again, the reliance on better living through chemistry of the 20th century. DuPont, Monsanto, and others had this great thought that everything could be resolved with these synthetic chemicals that we had the scientific capacity to alter, altering the natural world in a way to tailor it to our needs, maybe not for the betterment of human health, but for the profitability of multinational corporations with no allegiance to any nation or state. So it's, again, a fascinating journey back into this reality that is very uncomfortable to look at because we have to self-reflect and acknowledge that we were all duped, we were all played, and some in the human race said, you know what, we don't care, we want to profit and make as much money as we can, and we don't care who's hurt or killed. And that's a harsh thing to consider because most of us would never consider doing that to another human being, and they count on that to deceive us because we wouldn't do it, therefore they wouldn't, and no one would do that. But the reality of history of humanity is that, yes, there are people willing to do horrible and evil things to other people, including children and animals. And because you wouldn't do it, you assess that others wouldn't, and that's unfortunately used against us. So there are people that have nefarious agendas for profitability, and even though you wouldn't do it, there are others that would.
There does appear to be a nefarious agenda behind many vaccines, and that's the hard thing to swallow. We would not do this to others, but there are people that would and are doing this to us, all for the sake of money.
With hospitals, they've incentivized shot taking for physicians. Physicians were making more money for having given the shot than not. If hospitals were declaring people dead when they died of COVID, they got more money from Medicare for that, like up to 20 grand more. If you were a COVID hospital and you could reach the minimum threshold of, let's say, 150 COVID patients, now you didn't have to test them, even the PCR test. You just had to have reasonable degree of confidence that they were COVID patients to get up to that threshold, and then you'd get 70 grand extra per patient. I mean, those are big, big numbers. But it's also culture changing numbers. You get all these smart people telling you this is what you need to be health and safety. It's hard for people to buck the system, and they're free. You go get these shots for free to keep you safe, or you can trust Ty and John and go get some vitamin C, vitamin D, some zinc, maybe some ozone, hydrogen peroxide, but it's all out of your pocket. It doesn't cost you anything because insurance won't pay for any of that. So it's quite a business.
It is quite a business. But as the Bible says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul?
Sadly, Big Pharma and many medical organizations, including the AAP, appear to have lost their souls in search of the almighty dollar.
The American Association of Pediatrics has been a recipient of COVID-19 Community Corps funding. That came from the Biden administration and HHS. Furthermore, that society and so many more actually have taken donations from Big Pharma, notably Pfizer, other companies, and that influence goes unchecked. So we have a situation here where there's conflict of interest. These medical associations cannot possibly interpret information with fair balance because so much money has been given to them that tips the scale and tips their opinion in favor of mass vaccination.
Two things about the AAP and the push against vaccine hesitancy. First, noting that Pfizer is their biggest donor, so keep that in your head. But number one, there's a conflict that exists between public health and patient health. If you are a physician and you are following a public health diktat or standard of care that comes down from a government agency that is not in the best interest of your patient, this is a conflict of interest. And this is distinctly what is happening. It should alarm every American to realize that you are actually not in control of your body or what happens to it. And a physician is not actually in control of your body and what happens to it. A government agency, who, by the way, is funded by a corporate moneyed interest, is in control of your body and what happens to it. And there is a word for that, and that word is fascism. And the second point is that this really does come back to the coordinated coercion. Bloomberg said that the media is the fourth branch of government, and never in our history has this been more true. One of the most dangerous violations of which the media, in my opinion, is guilty is their censorship of science. And this is accomplished in many ways, but the government colluding with a corporation to censor and control civilians defines a First Amendment violation, and it also defines fascism.
The American Academy of Pediatrics, that never met a vaccine that it didn't want to push on you and particularly your children. And there's been, a few years back, a pronouncement from the World Health Organization, when they list like the top 10 threats to global health. Astonishingly, one of those threats they said, and this was before COVID, was something called vaccine hesitancy. That is, those of you who had observed, perhaps in your own life and body or in that of your children, that there were adverse events occurring after the childhood vaccine schedule. Any number of those shots that number beyond 70 now, if you take all of them recommended by the CDC in the United States over the course of childhood into young adult years, into the teen years. And so this organization, the AAP, is very keen on disputing anybody who would question any or all of those vaccines in light of the fact that they are sponsored by some of these manufacturers of these drugs or these shots, like Pfizer. There is inherent conflicts of interest that must be called into question. Many church leaders were duped, whether they be pastors, rabbis, imams, others, to promote to their flock, so to speak, the sanctity of these shots. Again, treating something that should be a scientific endeavor into a religious sacrament. So it is a conflict of interest inherent in many of these medical facilities and associations to promote vaccination because they profit directly and indirectly from it.
Robert used the term religious sacrament. Is vaccinology like a cult?
At this stage, we can accurately say yes, it's like a cult, and ultimately the sacrament, the initiation is really taking these quote inoculations, because once you take them, you can never say what would have happened if you had just relied on natural immunity. So this is unfortunately really more of a faith-based cultish belief than it is actual driven by evidence.
And the official story about the alleged effectiveness of the polio vaccine isn't really driven by evidence either. Here's what the mainstream media told us about the polio vaccine back in the 1950s, when superstars like Elvis Presley were used to influence the public to get vaccinated.
This is Elvis Presley. I ask you to listen.
Remember me.
Now that's the voice of thousands who know the fight against polio is just as tough as it ever was. Some of them are paralyzed so that they can't even move a finger. Others can't do the simplest everyday things that we take so much for granted.
Public service announcements told us that we had conquered polio through the vaccine.
An historic victory over a dread disease is dramatically unfolded at the University of Michigan. Here, scientists usher in a new medical age with the monumental reports that prove the Salk vaccine against crippling polio to be a sensational success. It's a day of triumph for 40-year-old Dr. Jonas E. Salk, developer of the vaccine. He arrives with Basil O'Connor, head of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which financed the tests. Hundreds of reporters and scientists from all over the nation gather for the momentous announcement. Proudly on hand, too, are Mrs. Salk and the son, who received the first injections. Chief Evaluator Dr. Thomas Francis pronounces the vaccine tests up to 90% effective, and modest Dr. Salk answers newsmen's questions.
But was this true? Was it a sensational success? Was it 90% effective? Or was this propaganda?
Did you know that there have been multiple outbreaks of non-polio paralysis since the 1950s? which is virtually indistinguishable from polio paralysis. Could the CDC and other governments across the globe be playing word games with the definition of polio?
I actually remember reading an article out of India back, it feels like it was probably 15, 20 years ago. And I remember the year that this article was covering, there were 50,000 cases of polio in India. And this was thought, they were in the process of eradicating it worldwide. And then now this outbreak in India, oh my Lord, we have to go in and vaccinate. And so sure enough, the World Health Organization and whoever else was involved, I think Gates might have even been involved back then, they went in and they gave oral polio to every living being in India, multiple times sometimes. And the next year, the data came out, there was zero polio. Remember, there were 50,000 cases the year before, and then after the vaccine, there was zero. But that year that there was zero after the polio campaign, there were 53,000 cases of non-polio paralytic disease. They had just reclassified it.
The year after India was declared polio-free, there were more than 50,000 cases of non-polio acute flaccid paralysis. And the non-polio acute flaccid paralysis was more prevalent, was more deadly, and impossible to treat. There were several pediatricians in India who spoke out and have continued to speak out, saying that this is crazy. We're now seeing sicker children, more lame children, more children that are dying from non-polio acute flaccid paralysis than we ever saw from miscellaneous polio viruses that the World Health Organization was absolutely determined to eradicate.
What they did was they said, you cannot diagnose polio unless you can prove it. You have to send a sample to the state lab. They failed to set up the state lab to accept any samples. So there was zero polio, but even more non-paralytic polio. They're playing games like that a lot.
The CDC plays games with the definitions of infectious disease in order to try to assign a false credit to the vaccines. They did this with polio. So after the polio vaccines came out, the CDC changed the definition of polio to make it appear that fewer people had polio to coincide with the introduction of the polio vaccines. And therefore they could point to that and say, look, wow, when the vaccines came out, polio cases declined. But in reality, nothing changed in the physiology of the people, except that more people were harmed by these vaccines. There weren't actually fewer cases of polio. There were just fewer cases of people defined as having the new narrow definition of polio by the CDC.
Suddenly after the vaccine came out, they'd require sometimes even that you would be paralyzed for 30 full days. And they definitely narrowed that definition to make it appear as if they had far fewer cases than before the polio vaccine came along. And they did that in their favor. So it would look like, oh, look, we've got the vaccine and now we have fewer polio cases. But when you're changing the very definition or the diagnosis of polio, naturally that's going to happen.
Before the polio vaccine, they just needed 20 cases per 100,000 to declare an epidemic. After, it was 35 cases per 100,000. But what was really interesting was this flood of new neurological, we'll call them, illnesses and diagnoses came in after the vaccine came out. So before, basically just polio. And that was lumped in, a lot of issues were lumped into polio, to one word. Afterwards, we saw this expansion. There was polio and some other stuff that looks like polio too. Viral meningitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Guillain-Barré syndrome, acute flaccid myelitis, acute flaccid paralysis. These were terms when the polio vaccine was introduced to reduce how many polio diagnoses there were to make it look like the vaccines were working. They actually started doing micro-diagnosing of specific symptoms within the polio victim and then would call that a new disease, but not polio. So they came up with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is actually modern-day polio, ascending paralysis of your right leg or left leg, and then the corresponding right arm or left arm, and then half your face, ascending paralysis. This is polio. Guillain-Barré syndrome, acute flaccid myelitis, and acute flaccid paralysis during the vaccine agenda for polio were how they convinced you that polio was eradicated with the polio vaccines. They just renamed a whole lot of the polio symptoms as new diseases without the word polio in it. So as the vaccine agenda continued, you saw less and less diagnosed polio, but you saw more and more acute flaccid myelitis, acute flaccid paralysis, and Guillain-Barré syndrome, and Bell's palsy, which are all the same neurological paralyzing symptoms of the virus they call polio.
By narrowing the definition of polio, the number of polio cases decreased, by definition. Is the entire global polio initiative based on a lie? And just how pervasive is polio today?
This global polio initiative is still around trying to eradicate polio. And every year they want more millions, hundreds of millions, $2 or $3 billion to completely eradicate polio. Well, in preparation for this interview, I actually looked it up online because they send out a weekly announcement of how many cases of polio virus they had found in various very poor countries that have no sanitation. They have no purified water. Many of them are war-torn countries. They would be sampling the water, sampling the sewage treatment areas that they had, or sampling outhouses, and they would find traces of polio. And when I looked it up today, just in preparation for this interview, there were 25 samples that were positive for polio viruses in the entire world. And of those 25 samples, only one in the entire world of 8 billion people was a wild polio virus. The other 24 were viruses that had passed through into the intestinal tract and out into the sewage from an oral polio vaccine. It's always just a travesty to me to think of what these third world countries could do with hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in terms of education and housing and sanitation and refrigeration and different things that they could do to build up their countries, maybe build a sewage treatment plant with hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, instead of chasing the very few residual polio viruses to eradicate them, when what is actually really causing these polio residual samples are coming directly from the oral polio vaccine itself.
Now we have something that is vaccine-induced polio. So yes, we have seen where children actually get the vaccine and now develop polio because of the vaccine. It's not the wild virus. It's not polio wild virus, but they're actually getting vaccine-induced polio.
The oral vaccine was a live virus vaccine that was itself causing polio, and sometimes to a very significant extent.
The polio vaccines always have caused polio. And so it's another situation where we were told a lie and you looked at, true, not related. So the polio vaccines, every case of polio in this country has been caused by the vaccine.
The number one cause of polio in the world today is polio vaccines. The number one cause of paralysis in India is from polio vaccines. These vaccines are harming and maiming and killing people all over the world right now. And it appears to be part of a global depopulation effort to try to reduce global population by billions of people under the guise of public health. They say it's a vaccine, they say it prevents disease, but actually it's causing more human suffering and death, and it's a violation of basic human rights to inject people with these medical experiments that even the researchers and producers know are linked to harming those people, maiming those people, causing infertility, spontaneous abortions, and premature death.
We'll cover vaccines that have been proven to cause sterility and spontaneous abortions in the future episode, so you don't want to miss that.
Just weeks after the Salk polio vaccine had been declared safe, more than 200 polio cases and 6 deaths were traced to the polio vaccine manufactured by the Către laboratories in Berkeley, California.
In other words, the polio vaccine actually caused polio and death.
But remember, in the cult of vaccinology, you are not allowed to question the polio vaccine. Here's a telling sentence in the DHHS Federal Register, Volume 39, Number 107, from June 1st, 1984, in reference to the final rules for polio vaccination campaigns in the United States after 3 decades of controversy. It states, quote, "Any possible doubts, whether or not well-founded, about the safety of the vaccine cannot be allowed to exist in view of the need to ensure the vaccine will continue to be used to the maximum extent consistent with the nation's public health objectives."
Why are well-founded doubts not allowed to be discussed, especially when the polio vaccine has been linked to cancer in over 60 different lab studies?
When I think of the polio cancer link, when I think about the entire polio story, a name pops out for me. Her name is Bernice Eddy. She was an NIH virologist epidemiologist. So in 1954, she's working at NIH, and her job was to test these vaccines. There was several vaccines rushing to market, like there was with COVID. A lot of people rushing to get in on this new idea and to really grab the market share first. And so her job was to test these vaccines on monkeys to see if they were safe. So she's testing these on monkeys, and she finds that one of these vaccines is causing paralysis in the monkeys. She sends the pictures to her superior, her head of the lab. She sends the reports, very detailed. The lab shuts her down, says, "We don't want to see this." Does not pass the information on to the Vaccine Advisory Committee, who later okays all these vaccines to go out. Well, the vaccine she was looking at was called the Către vaccine from the Către Laboratories, the polio vaccine. And as history shows, we have now the Către incident. 40,000 kids at least got polio. We have about 56 were paralyzed, 5 died, and those are the numbers that history shows. What happened to her? She was an NIH whistleblower. This woman should be given the Medal of Honor. She was actually demoted. She was taken off polio. NIH wanted nothing to do with her in that lab anymore. Eddy had an intuitive hit that there may be cancer viruses in these monkey culture cells, these monkey kidney culture cells they were using. And that's what they used to grow, as the culture they used was to grow this polio virus vaccine, and then this live vaccine to put it in the shots. So she was testing this with this other cancer doctor. They would inject it in hamsters to test it, and the hamsters were getting tumors. And they said, "Oh my God. It later turned out to be SV40. She brought that to her superior like she was supposed to. They shut her down again, but she learned her lesson this time. And what she did was she took it and she went to a cancer conference in New York City and presented it to the whole world, or at least the people there at the time who were world-renowned virologists and doctors. And what happened is they left and they started repeating the same studies, finding the same tumors in these rats. So eventually, the story broke in 1961 by the New York Times, and in true New York Times fashion, they said, Merck is just going to go ahead and withdraw their polio vaccine. Mentioned nothing about the cancer. The NIH and the powers that be, the CDC, let the stocks go out. They didn't recall these stocks. So about 98 million people received this vaccine with SV40 cancer virus in it. A couple years later, you had the New York Times finally admit, in a back page of the newspaper that well, yes, it was because of the cancer connection.
The polio vaccine is known to cause cancer. In fact, the CDC admitted this for decades on their website before they pulled that information off their site a few years ago. They admitted that 98 million Americans were injected with polio vaccines that were contaminated with a cancer-causing simian virus known as SV40, and they just whitewashed it, even though they caused cancer for decades and generations to come. And they just tried to memory hold that entire fact and hope that nobody noticed. Well, we noticed.
Any sort of virus, in order to get it to replicate, it has to replicate in living tissue. When the polio vaccine was made, they finally found tissue that the virus was able to replicate in, and it was monkey kidney tissue. Monkey kidney tissue was found to have a virus called simian viruses, simian viruses, monkey viruses, and they were completely benign to the monkeys. They just were normal pathogens. They were superficial symbionts, just like when we have viruses, bacteria on our skin, or we have E. coli in our colon. It was just a normal symbiont that caused the monkey no problem. But when we used the monkey kidney cells in the petri dishes to grow the viruses, many of those vaccines also ended up with traces of the simian viruses, and this particular virus called SV40, into the vaccine itself. And SV40 has been shown multiple different studies over many decades to be what's called a slow virus, which means it can cause cancer very slowly. things like mesotheliomas, osteosarcomas, brain tumors that they've been associated with.
The government purported that these vaccines were perfectly safe, and of course it was discovered later on that this approximately 10-year window of vaccine production was contaminated with a virus called SV40, simian for monkey, SV40 contamination. And there are studies that link that SV40 contamination to different forms of cancer. And that's a fact. That's not conspiracy theory. That's evident in the medical literature. In fact, the study that was released was around the year 2000, and then I believe it was in November of 2003, there was actually a House committee investigation and then meeting that brought all of this information to light regarding the contamination of the polio vaccine between the late 50s and the early 60s.
It's not disputed that the SV40-laced polio vaccines caused cancer.
Here's a little polio vaccine history. In 1955, Jonas Salk created the inactivated polio vaccine, which was given as a shot. A more convenient form, called the oral polio vaccine, was developed by Albert Sabin in 1962 and given as liquid drops to the mouth.
The oral polio vaccine was recommended for use in the United States of America for almost 40 years, from 1963 to 2000. However, most developed countries ceased using the oral polio vaccine decades ago because it could cause paralysis, and instead have used the inactivated polio vaccine. The main problem is that this vaccine does not prevent infection and transmission.
Don't believe us? Well, feel free to argue with the World Health Organization and the CDC about it, because their Global Polio Eradication Initiative explains, quote, when a person immunized with inactivated polio vaccine is infected with wild poliovirus, the virus can still multiply inside the intestines and be shed in the feces, risking continued circulation. And that, quote, as inactivated polio vaccine does not stop transmission of the virus, oral polio is used wherever a polio outbreak needs to be contained, even in countries which rely exclusively on inactivated polio vaccine for their routine immunization program. There you have it, straight from the horse's mouth.
Despite the fact that they openly admit that the inactivated polio vaccine does not stop transmission of the virus, the CDC still recommends that children get 4 doses of this vaccine.
The good news is that polio is extremely rare, and there are natural remedies for polio, but you've got to look outside the box.
Ozone stops even the most aggressive viruses like polio in minutes, less than 7 minutes actually. And in most viruses, less than 2 minutes. And so the whole idea of controlling infectious diseases was stopped by the invention of hygiene, personal hygiene, proper nutrition, and especially super nutrients, and the invention of the ozone machine. Anybody can be trained up, like a doctor could be trained up in one day on how to run ozone on any other patients that's dealing with any kind of infectious disease and wipe it out in hours. This is how backwards everything is. So essentially, this satanic enterprise, and I'm going to use that word because it is, which we call Big Pharma, has monopolized healthcare and is literally viciously trying to wreck anybody who opposes an actual or who actually brings forth an innovation and opposes their overall inject to health strategy, which doesn't make any sense on any investigation. One of the things that I do teach doctors and health professionals and people who just want to learn is about how to use ozone against respiratory infections, for example. And one of the things that I show people how to do is you get an ozone machine, Nikola Tesla design. I've had one going for 25 years. Never broke, never a problem, never had to send it back, never had any single problem with it in all those years. They're bulletproof, amazing system. And so I've been using this one for 25 years. It's going to produce from one side, it's going to take from the oxygen tank, and it has to come from an oxygen tank. It cannot come from the air because you don't want to ozonate nitrogen in the air. It's got to be pure oxygen. So the oxygen comes in on one side, and then it comes out the other side electrified or ozonated. It's been turned from O2 to O3 and O4 and O5, O6, O7, O8, O9, O10, O11, O12, O13. And then that goes into olive oil, which sucks up the more aggressive O3, O4, O5, O6, but allows the O7 and above to come through so I can breathe it. And that will neutralize a respiratory infection in an hour or two. You just breathe it, breathe it, or you can have a friend over and say, here, you breathe it now. Okay, I'm breathing. Okay, this and that. Husband and wife, here, breathe this, honey. Okay, back and forth. It's really fun. And even the worst cases, for example, years ago, back in the SARS epidemic, a friend of mine really got SARS bad, and he could not kick it for 3 months, and he was on the big island of Hawaii. I was in San Diego at the time. He flew back, came to my office, and I fired up the ozone bubbling through olive oil. You can't normally breathe olive oil, or you can't normally breathe ozone because those O3, O4, O5, O6 is too aggressive on your mucosal membrane, but once it's been bubbled through olive oil, you can. So we did that, like this, back and forth like that, and in 2 hours, it was over for him. He'd been dealing with it for 3 months. This is just how, we're dealing with a monopolized PSYOP control, right? So they've monopolized healthcare, and then they're using psychological operations, mostly through the scientism religion, to keep people in their sphere of reality. Like, look here, it's this box over here you're supposed to be looking into.
So indeed, the nosode therapy is quite different from vaccination in that it cannot cause the actual disease, whereas if you've heard about the controversies of vaccination, so-called attenuated or live virus vaccines like polio, actually causing paralysis. And in fact, after the supposed eradication of polio, it's fascinating to learn that the only cases of polio and paralysis were occurring in fully vaccinated individuals, whereas the homeopathic form of the polio vaccine, or nosode, cannot cause that sort of, that manifestation of paralysis in any way, shape, or form, but can alert the immune system via the metabolic interface or interplay, sort of an energetic interface that is prior to actual exposure to the physical molecules.
There is no question that the polio vaccine can actually cause polio, whereas homeopathic nosodes for polio cannot, because they are 100% safe.
But are most of the vaccines on the CDC's pediatric schedule truly safe? Or is the vaccine schedule one massive experiment?
Vaccines are not safe and effective. Vaccines are at best unknown to be safe and effective because they've never been tested or tried to be determined. That's at best. At worst, the entire vaccine agenda is to create death, disease, and harm as an experiment on you and your children to sell you drugs for life. The vaccine agenda is nothing more than a massive global experiment, and they're tracking what their toxins and venoms and poisons are doing in your body to create what diseases, so they can create new drugs to sell you for the rest of your life. That's the entire vaccine agenda. It's all one big experiment.
Vaccines are classified for tort liability purposes as unavoidably unsafe. And the reason is that vaccinations will harm a certain segment of the population, even if used according to their manufacturer's design. That puts the vaccines in the same category as chainsaws and dynamite. The only question is how many people are harmed. And that's where control group studies are very important, because control group studies, genuine control group studies, will show the exact number of people who are harmed by the product in question. And that is how we know whether a product is safe or unsafe, whether injury is common or rare. And every control group study of the unvaccinated has consistently shown that vaccine injury is common.
People wonder why, the vaccination schedule has exploded to 73 different vaccines for 17 different diseases between ages of 0 and 18. Okay, that's huge. But when you look at the liability shield, it behooves vaccine manufacturers to put more vaccines on the schedule because there is literally no liability associated with it. When you look at the 1986 National Child Vaccine Injury Act, and you look at then the Brucewitz versus Wyeth decision in 2011, it is impossible to sue a vaccine manufacturer for an injury, and everything goes to the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which we know is woefully undercompensated. That results in most of the claims being denied unless they're what's called a so-called table injury, which is a very, very limited scope of vaccine injuries where where causation has been so established. But my son, we participated in National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program for him. We were in the program for 16 years waiting a decision. The decision came out negative, and it was a brutal and excruciating process. It cost my family money, it cost my family time. And so, there is no remuneration for a vaccine injury in the United States. With COVID-19, it's going to be worse.
Dr. Hooker's right. With the COVID-19 injection, it gets worse. The irony is sad but true. If you're cognitively blind enough to believe the government and take the COVID-19 injections and the boosters, they can make you literally go blind due to massive blood clotting inside your eyeballs, according to major new medical research.
A new large-scale study out of England indicates that those who take the COVID-19 injection have a substantially increased risk of going blind.
Published in the British journal Nature, the paper explains that, compared to the unvaccinated, those who obeyed Tony Fauci and other government liars have up to 350% increased chances of suffering from some kind of visual impairment.
But people aren't just going blind from the COVID injections. Many are dead, including top athletes from all over the world.
These young people that are just, in peak physical condition, athletes, soccer players, football players, and all of a sudden they just sort of drop dead on the court. I mean, what's that from? If it happens once or twice, yeah, okay. I mean, people have congenital heart disease and might have issues, WPW syndrome. I had a friend who died with WPW, Wolff Parkinson White. That's an arrhythmia issue in the heart. So, those things happen. But when it's happening by the dozens or hundreds, you got to think, those are flags. If you're not paying attention and just ignoring it and chalking it up to who knows what, you're lying to yourself. So yeah, I think there's a lot of iatrogenic injury from those vaccines, especially in our youth.
It's distinctly unusual that a child would drop dead playing sports. Previously, the most common cause of that was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a congenital thickness of the heart that blossoms after puberty. And most upper-level athletics has screening for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's done by EKG and cardiac ultrasound. So we hear about fewer and fewer cases of that because of modern day screening. At the college or pro level, all the kids are screened for that. So when we see a cardiac arrest at the college and pro level, the first thing we think of now is COVID-19 vaccination and myocarditis.
It's well over 1,100 now, and these are athletes in the best condition of their life, fathers, mothers, sisters, uncles, cousins, that have just dropped dead after being vaccinated while playing. And it's usually with heart-related issues, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. That doesn't include reproductive issues. That doesn't include neurological issues, which we've had many of those on our Voices podcast. These people, women have had a lot more neurological issues. We won't know for 20 years on the reproductive issues, but there's so many things wrong with these shots, and people need to understand that. They need to start distrusting the CDC, the FDA. They're not doing their job. The NIH, the NIH, everybody with an initial. It's a big deal because they're not doing their jobs, and people are being hurt.
It's a distinct possibility that many of the people who are dying suddenly are suffering from iatrogenic deaths. But more importantly, the question should be, why isn't everyone in the medical science field asking that question? So the idea that anyone would be opposed to the call for more science is absolutely baffling. There's zero doubt that this is, at the very least, a signal. And historically, if we are objective in our investigation, we chase down signals. Real science chases down signals. So the idea that anyone would be disallowed from investigating is astonishing, because wouldn't you want to know? It's not normal for children to have myocarditis. It's not normal for teenagers to be dropping dead of myocardial infarction while playing sports. So while these cases do occur, they are rare. At least they're rarer than in recent years. And the issue that we face right now is that, honestly, this could be attributed to any number of or combination of insults, but we do not have the proper tracking or the tracing or the surveillance in place. And most importantly, we don't have the proper cohort studies. So we know that it must be an insult because our genetics have not changed. So the idea that we would not include all factors and cofactors into this equation to try to come up with an answer is, I mean, it's absurd. It's the abandonment of first principles. It's the abandonment of science.
We now have over 200 peer-reviewed manuscripts describing COVID-19 vaccine-induced myocarditis or heart damage. The majority are in the pediatric and adolescent age group. Peak age is 18 to 24. And myocarditis is heart inflammation, damage to the heart, because the vaccine is distributed to the heart. The COVID-19 vaccines are loaded on lipid nanoparticles. They travel everywhere in the body, the brain, the adrenal glands, reproductive organs, and the heart. And because of exercise and constantly using the heart, more and more vaccine is drawn up into the heart, particularly with athletes. And what's been demonstrated is that the genetic material installs into the heart. The cardiac cells and the support cells called pericytes produce spike protein. The spike protein is the surface protein on the virus. It's recognized to be foreign. The human immune system attacks its own heart cells, begins to cause inflammation and swelling. This causes chest pain, effort intolerance, abnormal heart rhythms, and sadly, in some, it causes cardiac arrest. Study after study after study demonstrates the vaccines cause disturbances in menstrual function. That suggests that, in fact, the ovaries are being hit by the spike protein. Any change in menstrual cycle, that is ovulation, conception, and then implantation, any disturbance of that almost certainly is going to lead to infertility. I can tell you in the male side, 2 papers show reduction in sperm count and quality related to vaccination. So we have a picture here that doesn't look good. Everything we can see regarding the vaccines, they don't improve the well-being of reproductive people. In fact, they drop fertility and almost certainly are at the sole source of where we're seeing declines in fertility worldwide.
What's really difficult is chronic things. So if I give a child a vaccine and boom, right away they go into anaphylactic shock, that I can kind of say, okay, that was probably related. But when a child regresses with neurodevelopmental problems over a period of weeks or months or years, autoimmunity can take years to develop. You don't make the connection unless you're actually thinking about, might there be a connection? And doctors don't.
But you don't need to worry about chronic illness resulting from the COVID-19 vaccine. We have solutions. We have remedies.
The Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance, this is Dr. Pierre Corey's organization, along with a lot of other great doctors. They actually have just put out, as of this year, their protocols for people who have taken the vaccine. And there's a couple kind of pillars to what they're doing when you look at this protocol. It's basically to try to eliminate the spike protein from the body and also to eliminate the effects of the spike protein from the body. So we're talking about the issues with coagulation, some of the neurological issues, things like that. So in that protocol, I mean, there's a lot of things that you've talked about for years, everything from vitamin D, vitamin C, all the way to hyperbaric oxygen treatment, nattokinase. This is a part of this fermented Japanese soybeans. They're finding that has some promise to eliminate some of the spike protein. Ivermectin's even a protocol in there to get some of the spike protein out. Intermittent fasting. There's a lot of stuff people can do. It's very basic. I would recommend going to that. It's one of the best resources, most well put together resource I've seen to date.
The FLCCC, which is short for the Frontline Critical Care Consortium, I believe. It was founded by Paul Merrick, who's a physician from South Africa and one of the most published physicians in the world in critical care medicine, and then his associate, Pierre Corey. You can go to their site and they have a whole wide variety of different, more or less conventional medicine protocols that you can use, the most prominent one being ivermectin, which Pierre Corey has been the primary champion of. Very, very safe medication that's used a long time. It seems to bind to the spike protein, and many people have gotten good results. Very difficult to get, was almost impossible unless you get it out of the country. but I can tell you one of the excuses you can use, or pretenses, is that when the pharmacist, either your physician calls it or you explain, you can say it's been used for parasites. Ask for something specific, you can say scabies, because it is a well-accepted, documented medication for scabies. So this, even in Florida, I actually had a friend who had scabies and wrote the prescription for it, and you cannot get the prescription in Florida without the pharmacist asking you what's it for.
One of my biggest heroes of this whole movement of both treating COVID-19 and now treating COVID-19 vaccine injury is Dr. Pierre Corey. And he's associated with frontline COVID critical care workers. And so if you go to flccc.net, they do have protocols for treating COVID vaccine injury, and they're seeing lots and lots of COVID vaccine injury. One of the things is getting rid of the spike protein, and there is a supplement. I'm not a practitioner, so I don't give medical advice, but there are supplements, things like nattokinase, that will directly destroy the spike protein in circulation.
Nattokinase, an endogenous thrombolytic, a proteolytic enzyme produced by Bacillus subtilis natto, which is a bacteria that breaks down soybeans. It produces enzymes. It's available as a capsule. Japanese have used it, natto, in their diet for over 1,000 years. It's been available as a supplement for a couple decades, largely for cardiovascular health, because it is a mild blood thinner. And I have great hope that nattokinase, continued administration, will reduce the spike protein burden in the human body, and people will begin to resolve these syndromes and hopefully resolve the risk of a future fatal development like a blood clot, a heart attack, or some other health catastrophe.
We had cases of enzymes where somebody my mom's pool guy. This guy he was injured by the second vaccine, I think it was Moderna in that case, and he was in Mexico and he had to go back and forth across the border. Anyway, he had problems in his I think his right arm and his right knee. It was on one side of his body, and he couldn't straighten his arm out. He couldn't straighten his knee out. He had some serious problems. So I said, look, I'm going to give you these enzymes. If you take the whole bottle, I'll show you how to get more, but I'm only going to give them to you if you actually take them. And let me show you how to take them. So we went through that. He ended up getting 2 more bottles. He was completely well, just from that. Enzymes as a remedy is really important. And I really like serrapeptase and nattokinase and other enzymes, the normal enzymes, the proteolytic enzymes, the bromelain, which is a type of proteolytic enzyme, the lipases that are out there in these products. And, it's nice to have all that in one product together. And actually there is a product that has it all together, another product by Dr. Group, which is Veganzymes, which I like. And that's what I gave to the guy who had the injuries, who was my mom's pool guy.
Proteolytic enzymes, things like nattokinase, serrapeptase, proteases, strong acid proteases even, and then things like papain and bromelain, very, very, very good. See, in naturopathic medicine, we have always taught that viruses are toxic proteins. Therefore, you have to enable your body to produce the proteolytic enzymes it needs to break those down, or you have to add proteolytic enzymes to your system in the presence of a virus so those proteolytic enzymes can go dissolve the virus. Okay, kind of a pretty simple function, right? And what we found is, just like any other viral issue, these work really well.
God has given us what we need to be healthy, and He's given us what we need to detoxify from the COVID injections too. Our immune systems are powerful, and when we fuel our body with what it needs, then we can live long, healthy lives.
So be encouraged. We are on God's side. We have the truth on our side, and we will win.
For those people who think that we are losing and everything is in a state of despair and despondency, no. 30 years ago may be the case, but not now. Now you are in the majority. You are part of that majority of the adult population of the world who has come to the very clear realization that you've been lied to, that these things are not properly tested, they are not safe, they are not necessarily effective, and They can be downright dangerous. And once you've lied to people, once you've forced them to do this, once you've coerced them by dint of losing their jobs, their income, putting food on the table for their families, once you've put them in that invidious position, there's no way back. They're not going to forgive you for doing that, particularly if in responding, falling foul of your coercion, they have a vaccine reaction, or one of the people that in their family, the people they love, has had a vaccine reaction. You're never going to get that trust back again. They've lost it. They can have any number of meetings they like to discuss how to get it back. Sorry, guys, you've blown it. We are winning. Imagine, if you like, what it's like on K Street in Washington at the headquarters of one of these marketing companies that's being paid millions and millions by the pharmaceutical industry, and people are turning against the shot in droves. They're screaming at each other. They're in meltdown. They do not know what to do. Why don't they believe us anymore? They don't believe you because you have lied to them, and they will never believe you again. So when you despair, when you are in a state of despair, and there are many, many reasons for feeling despair in the face of what's happened, bear in mind that they are in even greater despair because they are the liars being exposed and they are falling apart. And all we have to do is to keep pushing forward, to adhere to the necessary scientific and medical principles, to maintain our integrity, to continue fighting the fight on behalf of pursuing that objective for safe and effective interventions for people, or indeed trusting in nature. And I'm an adherent to trusting in nature, and I really believe that, as has been shown to be the case, that natural herd immunity is at least as good, and I think will turn out to be much, much more effective than vaccine shot-induced immunity.
Don't always go and pop a pill. Revelations 22:2 says, the leaves of the trees is for the healing of the nation. We have to go back to where it started from. Natural nature is what we're going to have to do. And that's what you're going to have to do as well. So I would just say, be brave. Walk through the fear of the unknown and know that God's got this. God will prevail.
Yes, we will prevail. And one of the ways we will win is by sharing this docuseries with all your friends and family. They need this information.
That's why we created Remedy, because you deserve the truth. You deserve answers. And you deserve solutions. There's nothing more valuable than your health. And if you know the truth, if you know the remedies, you can be healthy. But the censorship industrial complex does not want you to know your options. They want to keep us unaware and compliant.
But they don't understand that we outnumber them by at least 1 million to 1. We know that you have friends and family that need this information. That's why when you choose to own the Hero Package of Remedy, we're going to give you 5 additional thumb drives or DVDs, your choice, absolutely free.
The freedom-hating tyrants and censors that want to silence our voices, they can't stop you from giving away the DVDs and the thumb drives. So just click the button below to take advantage of this special offer. Thanks in advance for your support. We really appreciate it, and we couldn't do this without you.
We'll see you tomorrow for episode 3 as we uncover more hidden truths about the hepatitis and chickenpox vaccines, dive further into the COVID-19 injections, and, of course, provide you with more life-saving remedies. Here's a brief preview.
If they really cared about our health, wouldn't they stop this glyphosate from being sprayed on our food? All of a sudden, they so desperately care about our health that they want to force us to get this shot that has side effects that they have no idea about. And it's just, you didn't need to be a genius to go, something stinks here.
And they've convinced enough of us to now rely on the fact that we don't have to do anything for our health to keep ourselves healthy. We don't have to worry about our diet. We don't have to exercise. We don't have to go outside and get sunlight. We don't have to take supplements. You can just get a shot from us. You'll never get sick.
When child go to the pediatrician at visits for 2, 4, and 6 months, it should be an educational event for parents, particularly a new parent. Instead, it's a vaccination day. and they can get 6 or 7 shots at the same time.
No one has really looked at the effects of receiving 8 or 9 vaccines, which is commonly done in the United States on a single visit.
The CDC has access to the vaccine safety data link, and this links everyone's medical records, but they've never really data mined it, which would take, a couple IT people, probably a couple weeks to just plug in some algorithms. They've never done it for vax, unvax for total health outcomes. You know who has though? Paul Thomas, Dr. Paul Thomas, pediatrician.
Well, it turns out from our data that was very significant, those who were unvaccinated were actually providing the greatest protection to the community because they don't get sick. Anyway, the study we published in the International Journal of Public Health was powerful. That was published in November of 2020. And 5 days after that publication was available online, I get a call from my attorney. The Oregon Medical Board has emergently suspended your license. I gave them the information they wanted, except they didn't want the information that they got.
They conducted a coordinated effort to de-license and de-practice Dr. Paul Thomas, who is truly one of the heroes of our movement.
The most deadly toxic thing that's ever happened to humanity is the introduction of the hepatitis B vaccine at birth.
Babies shouldn't be having sex and shouldn't be doing IV drugs. Therefore, this vaccine is asinine to be given to a newborn baby.
When you introduce that shot on the first day of life, you will never know what kind of epigenetic disease you set up according to susceptibility.
Merck's vaccine was tested for 5 days. They looked for the solicited adverse events. GlaxoSmithKline's was 4 days. So that's your safety window that you're dealing with.
In my opinion, any vaccine that has been tested for 5 days, I've heard cases where sometimes they're studied for 3 days, is absolutely unacceptable.
In 1999, because the CDC itself was worried that the vaccines may be causing autism, they decided to do a study, and they retained a Belgian researcher named Thomas Verstraeten. And he found an 11.35 relative risk. That means an 1,135% rate or elevated risk of getting an autism diagnosis if you got that vaccine in the first 30 days. And they knew right then what it was causing the autism epidemic.
If you read the insert of the chickenpox vaccine, varicella, it tells you, it warns you, do not be around other people because you may shed this vaccine onto other people and give them chickenpox.
What is told to us by these pharmaceutical commercials is that if you had chickenpox, then the virus that causes shingles is still in your body. But what they don't tell you is if you've had the chickenpox vaccine, the same thing holds true.
So the shingle shot causes shingles. And so it was it's in our book Plague. It was one of the first things I saw.
There's so much sleight of hand in all this. So when these pharmaceutical companies want to get a product out in record time, they call it a vaccine. They can't have the vaccine if there's any medication, any workable thing that a person can use. It's by law. And so that's why they shot down hydrochloroquine and ivermectin.
They had to make sure none of those things actually came to the light of day, or else they would lose their EAU.
They had to deny the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. They had to actively deny that in order to maintain that liability protection under the emergency use authorization.
Cause of death is almost always known. Almost always known. Now we see large numbers of reports of deaths, cause unknown. The cause of this new category of death is most likely to be the COVID-19 vaccines until proven otherwise.
As far as the died suddenly realities and the fact that all of these media outlets, as well as all of social media, have literally targeted and just shoved down the memory hole the millions of reports that have occurred is really, God, I have to say criminal. It really is.
The way that these pharmaceutical companies are operating, they are murderers, is what they are. They are murderers. And what do you do to a murderer? You lock them up. You shut them down, you lock them up.
People were being threatened, people were having their licenses pulled, people were were being canceled for using things like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and zinc and vitamin C and vitamin D and recommending those things to patients. But we know, there's a huge host of information on the efficacy of those things, and they're safe. They're not drugs that are going to hurt you or kill you like remdesivir might.
But what you can do instead is high-dose vitamin C, take out white sugar and white flour out of your diet, do things to increase your immune system, shut down inflammation with things like turmeric.
There are homeopathic remedies that I would highly utilize and recommend, like Bryonia alba, Nux vomica, and Chelidonium.
2 cups of Epsom salts, 2 cups of baking soda, and 2 cups of hydrogen peroxide. So we take proteolytic enzymes, we take herbal anti-inflammatories, and we take fulvic acid before going out into public.
We already have a tool in the natural world brought in safely in the bioactive hydrosol technology at very low concentration to prevent the need for a vaccine even if it were to work.
I had some friends whose kids have been damaged by childhood vaccines since I became aware of them. And I said, I've always said, do what you think's best, you do your own research, but now I feel bad that had I mentioned it, maybe my friends would have taken an extra look at it and they wouldn't be dealing with children that were harmed. So I don't know that I can stay quiet anymore with what I know, and whether anybody hears it or not, I'm not sure it matters, but I'm going to try to inform people what I know. They can do with it what they want.
Remedy is discernment, and the remedy is to have those who took the vaccine recognize their mistake and go out and warn others.